Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and before we get started, I've got a new listener shout out. So welcome to Lisa, Cal, Brenda, Aloe, Lizard, Mike's Podbean 20, Michael and Pambo. I am so glad that you guys are joining us. Welcome to the Misfit Gardening tribe, and I hope that you guys are getting a lot of value from this podcast. Today's podcast, we're going to be talking about fall vegetable gardens. So let's dig in. And, you know, the season seems to be about a month behind in my garden. I don't know if it's the same for you, but for sure here in Utah, everything seems to be about a month behind. Normally, we've got a lot of powdery mildew problems, and they're just starting to show their head about now. We've had our first couple of tomatoes, actually. Some of them are from a Russian variety called Eagle's Beak that I bought seeds from a company that's now no longer in operation, which was really sad. But I'm so glad that I was able to get those seeds because they have been the first tomatoes producing in my garden. In fact, they came in before the subarctic plenty, which is supposed to be the world's earliest tomatoes. So I was quite impressed with those, and they're big tomatoes. But now, the tomatoes that we've got in our greenhouse, they're just starting to really produce. So I'm starting to get hold of some of those paste tomatoes because I grow a lot of paste tomatoes for canning. But usually around this time, this time in August, we're like elbow deep in canning already and trying to get our ourselves prepared and ahead of the game a little bit for all of the tomatoes coming in. So we're normally crazy canning right now. Like, in fact, I would take time off around this time in August so I could can and not have to worry about trying to do it after I finished, work. But right now, everything's kind of coming in sort of slow. Like, the beans are just starting to grow. I've got a couple that are about ready to harvest. So I've got some green bean pickles in my sights right now. And our peppers are really starting to produce. Actually, they've been quite surprising this year at how well they're doing, because in previous years, peppers have not been very good. But with the heat of August, we've got lettuces that have bolted or gone to seed, and, our squashes are starting to get bigger and starting to ripen. We've had a few spaghetti squashes already, which has been great because they're one of my favorites to grow. But fall is on the way, and I know that I mentioned the other day that winter's coming, and it's very true. It really is. But with fall being on the way, it doesn't mean that the time in the garden is over. In fact, it's far from it. And I've got lots of tips for you to have a successful vegetable garden, especially for fall. So let's get started, because my first tip is start early, and you're probably not going to like this because I know I've talked about this before on the podcast, and I know that I drive you guys crazy. When I'm saying, hey, fall's coming, winter's coming, we need to be thinking about our fall garden. And that's because timing is really important. Okay. I'm sorry that I stress you guys out about that. But it's true, because a successful fall garden is really all about timing. And by the time that most people are starting to think about a fall garden, it's a little bit too late. Many of the crops that you might be planting in your fall gardens, so things like heading cabbage, carrots, one of my favorites, purple sprouting broccoli. These plants need to be started by mid-July so that you're putting out transplants in the heat of August, so that they've got a chance to grow before the days get short and the temperature drops. Okay, carrots we don't want to be starting inside. We want to be starting those outside and directly sowing those into the garden bed. But before you panic that you've missed the opening, there are some fast growing veggies that you can grow, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, so stay tuned. But if you're listening to this and you're already in full blown panic mode. Like, you know, this is like more than a towel is going to solve. All of you sci-fi nerds are going to get that reference. But, you know, don't be afraid to use transplants, okay? Transplants from the nursery or the garden centre. Don't be scared to use those, okay? Sure, you're not going to have a great selection of heirloom or open pollinated varieties available, but, you know, think about what's more important to you. Is it growing food that's free from chemicals, or is it trying to save seeds to grow later? Okay, you might be more focused on food. That's fine. I'm obviously more interested in seed saving from certain crops and harvesting others for food. And both answers are okay. It's okay if you're more interested in saving seeds. It's more, you know, it's fine if you're more focused around food. Our homesteads are all different, okay? Just like I'm different from you, you're different from your neighbour and from everybody else, okay? You're all unique in all of our homesteads, and our homesteads' needs are all different and all unique, okay? That's one of the beautiful things about it, is no two homesteads and no two gardens are ever the same. Like, my garden's totally different from my neighbour's and they're just over the fence, okay? Focus on what's important for you and your goals for your fall garden to help you to basically help steer you in the right direction, okay? Now, for example, because I'm a lot more focused on seed, I'm not ripping things out as quickly as I would be if I was growing more for food, okay? I'm wanting things to stay in the ground longer so I can harvest the seeds. But if you're more focused on food, then timing's going to get really important for you, because you want to be getting things harvested and out pretty quickly, so you can start getting things for fall in, okay? So let's talk a little bit about starting the seeds for fall, okay? And my next tip is start indoors. Midsummer weather is not very supportive of seeds germinating, okay? It's hot, it's dry, and there's way more pests roaming around your garden. You want to give your fall crops the best start by starting them indoors. It's cooler, you can keep an eye on the temperature and the moisture a lot more easier, and you can check out like the blog post that I did about seed starting, and then I also did a previous podcast about seed starting, so you can check those out, and I'll make sure to hook up to the blog post in the podcast description. If you've got things like carrots that you're wanting to grow, then they need to be sown directly into the garden bed, and you can coax them into germinating by keeping the area moist, and you can cover it with a wet piece of burlap or hessian sacking over wire hoops, okay? Something that's going to shade that ground and help keep that moisture in a little bit. And once they germinate, you can go ahead and remove that burlap. So that's just a quick tip there for you. All right, number 3, know your days to maturity. And this is something that I talk about in the Grow Your Own Food Academy. And it's really key to growing your own food like a boss, okay? Because you want to be using the days to maturity to time your fall garden so that you get to start harvesting mature crops by the time that the first killing frosts arrive, okay? So it's all about timing. And the days to maturity is so important for planning a garden that the Academy members actually get my very own planting and seed starting schedule spreadsheet that I use, that's got like over 300 varieties of fruits, herbs and vegetables in there, to help you figure out your fall starting dates for seed starting, but also your spring, when you can expect harvests and stuff like that. So if you're really serious about getting more from your victory garden, then check that out. And when that goes live, you know, that's something that you're going to want to consider getting. But knowing your dates to maturity is really helpful, because you basically count back from when your expected frost is going to be, and then count back the number of days plus a week or two, just to ensure that you're going to have something growing before that frost arrives. But you basically count back those days, and then you figure out when to start those seeds. Now, for example, you know, if I've got a frost in the 1st of October, and my plant takes 60 days to be ready to harvest, so it's got 60 days to maturity, then I'm going to count back 60 days and then add another week just as a safety buffer, so I know what date it is that I need to be sowing that. So if we go 60 days from October 1st, that would be July 1st that I would want to be starting those seeds. However, if with an extra week buffer, I would want to be starting around the 27th-ish of June. maybe a little earlier, maybe more like the 21st of June. So I know that those plants are going to be ready well before that first frost hits. Okay, so it's all about a numbers game really, and having that information and a calendar to help you kind of count that out and plan those things out is really, really helpful when it comes to fall gardening. Okay. So number 4, harvest summer crops quickly. I know I talked about that a little bit. Many of you might be standing where I am right now, okay? Like summer crops are just starting to produce, but one of the big wins that you can have in fall gardening is really getting them in the ground as soon as your summer crops are done, okay? So that means pulling out things like determinate tomatoes, lettuces that are bolting, and other plants that are finished ASAP, so you can get in there with your fall crops, because the sooner that they're going to be out in that garden, they're going to be able to put some roots down and really get established. But before we want to transplant them, we want to energize the soil. For you guys that have been following along for a while, that's not a surprise, okay? I'm always talking about improving the soil. So, if you're going to be growing more in the space, then you need to add more back to the soil, okay? So get 2 inches of compost added to that garden bed, maybe work it in the top couple of inches or just spread it on there. It doesn't really matter. And, do what's right for you and for your garden. I don't always work it into the soil before transplanting. Sometimes I will throw it into the planting hole as I'm going. Whatever feels right for you and your garden, okay? And, you can add some other stuff to the planting hole as well, or to the garden bed, things like mycorrhizal fungi, maybe some biochar, rock dust and kelp meal to help give those fall veggies that you're planting a nutritious boost, okay? Because if they've got plenty of nutrients in that soil, guess what? They're going to grow, and they're going to grow quickly. All right, number 6 is all about planning. Okay, so have a list of what's growing and when the harvest is expected to finish. So it's going back to those days to maturity, right? And you want to know what's going to be coming out of the garden when. Okay, and this is how, farming and people who have really got it nailed on how to grow food year round, this is where they got it all figured out, okay? You want to plan your planting in spring and summer so that it's going to free up space by July for your fall garden, okay? So at the end of July is usually the end of planting season for things like heading cabbage crops and stuff in zone 6 and lower. Zone 7 and up, it's usually the end of August. So leafy crops like kale, collards, mustard, they've got a bit more leeway because they don't form a head. But those heading crops take a long time to grow, and if you don't time it right, then it's not going to form a head, and you can be missing out on a harvest, really. So it's really key to get an understanding of those crops that you're going to be planting and really pay attention to those dates when you need to be planting things and getting them transplanted by. So plan for mid-July if you're in zone 6 and lower, or mid-August if you're zone 7 and above for transplanting and starting seeds for those quicker growing crops, okay? If you're transplanting stuff by mid-July or mid-August, remember that you need to start your seeds for those 4 weeks earlier indoors, okay? This is so you can get those longer growing crops, so things like rutabaga or Swedes, turnips, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, cauliflower, collards and Chinese cabbage, stuff like that. You can get them in the ground early to get them well established, okay? If you're short on space, short on time, then things like winter salads, spinach, cilantro, radishes, small carrots, so things like châtaignet or Parisienne, and Swiss chard and beets are all good options, okay? Because those things don't need as long a time to grow before you can start getting things harvested. All right, tip number 7 is to keep things moist, okay? Don't let your garden dry out. This is going to stunt the growth of your plants. It's going to stop the germination of those seeds that you've sown directly in the ground. So keep newly sown and newly transplanted beds moist to help your garden grow, especially since this is happening in the middle of summer, right? Tip number 8 is to using mulch, okay? That's going to help keep moisture in your garden. Things like newspaper and cardboard are great for keeping the weeds out, and we all love less weeding, right? And they break down slowly, so they're going to keep the weeds out for longer. They also help to attract worms in the garden. Actually, any mulch does, but cardboard and paper seem to really attract worms to the garden. Just make sure that you thoroughly wet the paper or cardboard before using it. It helps to stop it blowing away. It also helps to break it down. It helps to keep the soil cool, and it helps to bring all those lovely worms into the garden as well. If you want to avoid the ink and glue issue in the garden from newspaper and cardboard, then things like straw, grass clippings from an untreated lawn, and fall leaves are really good organic mulches that you might have available or starting to become available. Watch out for slugs and snails setting up shop in the mulch and eating your veggies though. So if you notice like nibble marks and that inevitable shiny little trail that they leave, then entice them away from your plants with a beer trap, okay? Beer traps, dead easy to do. Just take a deep-ish container, so something like a margarine tub, something like that, and then you want to dig a hole that's going to be big enough to put that margarine tub in so it lays flush with the ground. Okay, you don't want to like cover it in with the soil, you want to keep that open. Okay, so you want to set that in. It wants to be flush with the ground because Mr. and Mrs. Slug and Snail are going to be coming, crawling over, enticed away by, what is this deliciousness that I'm smelling? See that there's this, nice pool of beer to get in, and they're going to crawl in there and drink themselves silly and then not be able to get out again. So pour in some beer. You don't need to fill it all the way up. In fact, you just kind of want to pour a couple of inches in the bottom, enough so they can get in but they can't get out, and then just check on that. Daily, you might need to scoop out what's in there, or take the whole thing out completely, dump it, refill it and put it in again. I did find when using beer traps that the cheap beers, and I'm using air quotations for beers because there's certain beers that are like not really beers to me, but I'm a brewer, okay, so like I brew my own beers, so I know what good beer is. But some of the craft beers and things are pretty good at attracting slugs and snails. Yours might like more malty beers, others might like more hoppy beers, so experiment with what you've got available. I wouldn't recommend using the really expensive stuff for this kind of exercise, but if you happen to have a bunch of people over for a barbecue or something, and somebody leaves a half empty bottle of beer and you got a slug and snail problem, put it to some good use. Okay, all right, number 9, kind of somewhat related, is about pest protection. Okay, so summer is much higher for the pest pressure or the pest burden, okay, and that just means that there's a lot more pests around looking for a yummy snack, and your wee baby fall garden seedlings look like an all-you-can-eat Vegas buffet to them. Okay, you want to cover your crops with some spun polyester floating row cover, put some hoops over them and help protect them from the pests. Okay, this type of floating row cover is going to let the light and the air and the water in, but it's going to keep the bugs out. Okay, and that's what we want. We want them to get established, because as the temperature drops off and things start to get cooler, the bugs also disappear. So that's one of the great things about fall gardening is, you can actually get things to grow without them being, eaten alive. I mean, right now I've got tomatoes with those flipping cricket things that have shown up again, and even though I've got them growing in the greenhouse, they've still managed to find a way in. So it's now a race between who's going to eat the tomato. Is it going to be me, or is it going to be that cricket, grasshopper, locust thing that I'm pretty sure is like staring me down every time I walk into the greenhouse? It knows I'm coming, and it knows that there's that one tomato that I've got my eye on that's perfect, perfectly round, and it's just starting to get ripe, and I know it's going to eat it, but obviously I don't want to pick it off the vine while it's green. I want it to be at the peak of the ripeness and stuff, because that's one of the joys of growing a garden. But if you are finding that you are having a lot of pest issues, then that's something that I learned from my conversation with Dale from Delectation of Tomatoes in one of the earlier podcast episodes that I did, and you can check that out. But, you know, he was saying all about using this floating row cover to keep the pests out, and it wasn't something that I'd really considered before, but it was kind of something that we sort of did in England for protecting crops from carrot fly, but that's definitely an option for you. All right, number 10 is starting some herbs. So fall, believe it or not, is actually a really great time to get perennial herbs planted. So you want to be putting them in a warm, sunny spot in the garden. Especially if you're living in those cooler zones where you've got a much colder winter, because, you know, lots of these herbs are from the Mediterranean and they like it to be warm and dry. So we've been able to keep thyme and rosemary growing because we grow them on the south side of the property right next to the house, where they're getting some of that radiant heat coming back. So herbs like thyme, oregano, or oregano, as you guys call it over here, sage, rosemary, chives and lavender are all really good options that do great for a fall planting. And now planting in fall means that they can get their roots established, avoid heat stress. But here's the other tip for you. A lot of the time, herbs and things like that go on sale towards the end of the season, because the nurseries and big box stores are trying to get rid of them because, you know, they think that the season's over. So you can pick them up really cheap. But herbs like mint and lemon balm can also be planted at this time. You can plant them in the ground, or you can plant them in containers if you don't have space to put them in. The same can be said for other perennials, so things like asparagus, and that takes a couple of years to get established. So, you know, if you've got a permanent space that you can put them in the garden and leave them be, fall's a great time to get those planted. Same with strawberries. You can get, bare root strawberries, you can get those planted, raspberry canes, blackberry canes, gooseberries. There's just so much that you can be planting in fall to get established, so you've got harvests coming up, maybe not in the following season, but you know, a season or two later. That's really when things take off, especially for fruit. Like usually like the third year after you've planted it, that's when you get massive harvests coming in. Okay, number 11 is leaving space for garlic and shallots. Garlic is really the easiest plant to grow. We grow lots of it every year. I grow so much that I've given it away to friends, family. I've encouraged other people to grow it. Just try to leave some space to plant garlic and shallots. Okay, they go in usually September to October. You want to find somewhere that is well draining and sunny, because they do the best in full sun come spring and summer next year. You just want to pop the clove of garlic or the shallot bulb in the ground about 2 inches deep, with the flat end down and the pointy end up. Don't unwrap it of that papery casing. Just plant them straight in, and then cover them with some mulch. I just cover mine with leaves from fall. That's it. That is literally it. And then you just kind of leave it until next spring, and then when things start growing again, then you can, start giving them a little bit of compost tea, side dressing with some compost, giving them the nutrients, and they will just grow quite happily as long as you can keep the weeds down. Easy peasy. Number 12 is frost protection, okay? So now's a good time to get building some low tunnels or hoop houses and cold frames to protect those veggies from the killing frost, okay? You want to be using some frost protection because that's going to extend your growing season for 6 weeks and beyond, okay? A hoop house has kept us in fresh greens throughout winter, even with the foot of snow on the ground, okay? And you can make them relatively inexpensively, and if you position them on a south-facing location, they're going to happily protect many, many frost-tolerant veggies to keep them available for harvesting throughout the winter. And what could be better really than, having to pop outside, to be able to harvest fresh veggies for Thanksgiving or fresh veggies for, the holidays. That was like one of the fun things when I had an allotment, was when it came to the holidays in December, I just, leashed up the dogs and took them for a walk, and we headed down to the plot, and we were harvesting plants out of the ground that we were then going to have for dinner. It was really quite lovely, because we'd be going there early in the morning. The frost is still on the ground. There's nobody else there. There's just maybe a little bit of mist, a couple of birds that you can hear, kicking about in the hedgerow. It was just lovely, and that's one of the things that I really miss from the UK, because here, I'm kind of trudging through a lot of snow to get to the hoop house to harvest things throughout winter. So, if you're living in a mild area, so here in the US, if you're in, somewhere in the south or Pacific Northwest, somewhere where you don't get very harsh winters, there's a lot of crops that you can grow that are frost tolerant, and you're going to be able to keep them growing throughout winter without a lot of frost protection. But if you're in areas that have got like harsher winters, you're in altitude, some of those factors, then definitely, look into using the frost protection. It's going to help you grow a lot more. It's going to help protect a lot of your plants from that frost and them sort of dying off, because that's really the goal for a fall garden, is having things that you can harvest and keep on harvesting well into the winter. So you might be wondering, what plants can you grow in a fall garden? Okay, so get your pen and paper out. We've got quite a list here. So number 1, arugula, or rocket as it's called in Europe. Beets or beetroot. Broccoli rabe. Brussels sprouts, if you're so inclined. They do not really feature in my garden because I can't stand them. Cabbage, I love cabbage, and I know Brussels sprouts are basically a baby cabbage, but they're really not, Mum. As much as you say that they are a baby cabbage, they're not. And I will only eat one sprout a year, and if I can get away with not having to eat that one sprout, that would be great too. Anyway, I digress. Cabbages. Heading cabbages especially, carrots, collards, like collard greens. You can get the heading sort or the leafy sort. Both work great over fall. Cauliflower, Chinese cabbage, or Napa cabbage as it's also known. They grow great. Garlic, kale, kohlrabi, lettuce, mitsuna, mustards. Pak choi or bok choy, I think they're similar. They're kind of those Asian greens, great for stir fries and things, but also baby leaf ones are good in salads. Peas, radishes, spinach, shallots, Swiss chard, and tatsoi. So there's quite a lot of things that you can be growing in the garden, and a lot of these plants are very quick to grow. So things like radishes are pretty quick. Spinach is quick, lettuce is quick. Okay, all those things you can get in the ground and start harvest them relatively quickly. Kale and beets are also very good because you can use them as like baby leaf for salad, or you can let them get a little bit bigger. So you've got things like braising greens. There's lots of like winter mix vegetables that you can get, especially salads that have got these different greens available. So things like chicory or radicchio. Those kind of spicy, bitter greens do really well in fall, and they're not quite as bitter as what they would be if you were growing them in summer. So that's one of the great advantages of growing a fall garden, as well as some plants taste so much sweeter. Until next time, I hope that you have a wonderful week ahead, and I hope that your garden grows beautifully. See you next week.